Okay, since there's absolutely not a video out there currently about this topic, right now I'm using the 18mm macro extension tube for the Fujifilm GFX. There it is, the MCEX-18G. It's a smart tube. There's no optics involved. Right now I currently have it on the 32 to 64 Fujifilm GFX lens. I've tried it indoors and outdoors on all current 7 lenses in the GFX series. It's the 250, the 120 macro, the 110 portrait, the 23mm. Interestingly enough, on the 23mm, you can get at 11mm. In other words, the front element to subject distance is like 11mm. You can get really, really, really close. This is where having a protective front a prophylactic filter on the lens is actually of some benefit. It's interesting, but on all of these lenses, you've only got a leeway of about 3 inches roughly. In other words, the lens absolutely will not autofocus whatsoever unless you're within that roughly, depending on the lens, roughly on the 23mm you only have like a half an inch. In other words, unless you fall within the front element and your subject, it will not focus. There's no way you can actually take a shot because it's just not within that range. And that's the case for all of these lenses. The best is the 45mm f2.8, which you can get about 3 inches or so away from your subject. But the range that you have for focus is only about, it's about like this. It's about 3.5 to 4 inches. In other words, you cannot get it into focus at the closest distance and closer than the closest or further than the furthest. So this is where actually having a macro extension tube on a zoom lens is always beneficial, because if you've only got a 3-inch range or less of bringing anything into focus out in the field, you wanted to do some macro photography with one of these lenses, obviously you do get 0.7 magnification difference as opposed to 0.5 on the 120mm macro. But on the 32-64, let me actually show you here. The camera went into sleep mode. I had it on for too long. Let's turn it back on again. You actually have a substantial difference. Here we go. Yep. This is at 32 millimeters, so at the closest focusing distance on the 32 to 64 to zoom. This is what you can do. It's about 2.5 inches away from subject, and this is at 64 closest distance. So you have about 1.5 inches leeway at 64, and the same thing roughly at 32. So this is 64, and this is 32. It's like about 90 some millimeters focus distance at 64 millimeters on the 32 to 64. And it's a lot closer at 32, so 32 and 64. But you also have all the intermediate focal lengths to frame your subject correctly between 32 and 64, be it 50 millimeters or 40 millimeters or 40 or 55 millimeters. So you have a lot more latitude for actually leaving this tube on the damn lens, you know, for a while if you want to take some macro shots. So if you didn't want to actually buy a macro lens like the 120mm here, you can actually do, and since you have enormous croppability with the medium format, you could buy this extension tube. I don't recommend the 45. The 45 is not usable with the 23, and it's nowhere near as good on this 32 to 64, but this is... I highly recommend purchasing this. It's like another lens. I mean, if you say, well, you know, the medium format lenses are kind of expensive, I could afford the body, and a lot of people are going to get the 32 to 64. And you keep this little macro extension tube in your bag, just hook this on your lens, and you have a substantial range of very close work that you could do. I mean, I think this is like 37 millimeters or 35 millimeters from the front element of the lens to the actual subject at 32 millimeters with the 32 to 64, and there we have it at 64. So 32 closest, 64 closest. So buy one of these for those GFX shooters out there, and its most usefulness is on the 32 to 64. The next most useful is with the 45 millimeter. Thanks so much for watching, and goodbye.